Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining this, which is our engineer interview this week. Today, we are joined by Andrew Smyth. Now, my name is Scott, and I work at Primary Engineer. Before we start, I wanted to say thank you very much for signing up to the competition this year. It's our 10th birthday, so we're so glad that you can be celebrating it with us. Now, we can't wait to see all of your amazing and creative ideas, and you're going to get some added inspiration today from our special guest speaker so that you can answer the question, if you were an engineer, what would you do? As part of these interviews, we're going to be speaking with engineers who work on loads of different projects, all of them showing the wonderful, interesting, and exciting things that happen when you work in engineering. Although these interviews are hosted live, we're going to be publishing them on our YouTube channel at the end of each week. They go live at midday on Fridays. Now, our special guest is going to start with a 10-minute presentation all about engineering, aerospace, and baking, and then we're going to open up to questions from the audience. Now, if you would like to ask a question, simply click the Q&A button on Teams and type your question in there. But for now, I'm going to hand over to our wonderful special guest, Andrew Smyth.
So hello, everybody. I'm Andrew Smyth, and I want to talk to you a little bit about engineering, baking, and this weird combination of the two that I call Baconering, which is combining the two. So I'll tell you a little bit about what life was like for me at school, what I do for my job, which is really exciting, and also some of the stuff that I've done on TV that you might or may not have seen. So to start with, I thought I've got to start with a picture of me at school. Now, I don't know why this is in black and white because I'm not that old, but it's a black and white picture, and I don't know if you can spot me, but I am right there at the back, right there, teacher's pet. I loved school, and I was really inquisitive child, always asking loads of questions of my teachers. I wanted to know how the world worked, and I was never really satisfied with the answers. I was always asking why. And at the same time, I also was really interested in aircraft and things that flew, be they birds, rockets, or for me, it was planes. So I decided to join the Air Cadets, and I really thought I wanted to become a pilot because I did some flight training. I loved maths and physics at school, and I just thought flight to this day is still amazing to me. So I did a little bit of flight training. But during that, I realized that I was actually a little bit more interested in how the plane worked rather than necessarily being the one that was driving it, as fun as that was. So that led me off to university where I studied engineering, specifically aerospace engineering, which is about how we design and build the things that fly and soar through the sky. So these are a few things. That's me with my silly hat on when I graduated, once I'd finished my degree. And I got to work on some really fascinating stuff, including what you can see on the right-hand side. And this is a special satellite. And you might have seen this in the news. It's been popping up more and more recently that we have a bit of a problem with space junk, or loads of little bits of satellites which are making space a little bit crowded near the Earth. So I was working on something using folded bits of paper, but made out of a slightly more advanced material, to help make a massive parachute to drag these bits of debris out of orbit and come back to Earth. So that was what I worked on, and I absolutely loved it. Realized that aerospace engineering was the thing for me. I wanted to work on the aircraft of the future, and that is why I joined Rolls-Royce, which is where I work today. So Rolls-Royce, we don't make cars, unfortunately. That's all made by BMW, but we do stuff that's far more interesting than that. We do jet engines, we do ship engines, we do the things that make nuclear submarines power under the ocean silently. But what I worked on was jet engines. And more recently, I've been working on what the future of aircraft might look like. Because one of the problems we have at the moment is with global warming and using fossil fuels, we're looking for ways to turn flying away from using those fuels to using things that are more green and more sustainable. So in the top right, that was a project I worked on, and that was going to be a taxi that could fly you through the sky just using batteries. Or on the bottom right, you might have heard of hydrogen. That's a really exciting but difficult fuel to work with, which means aircraft might look quite different in the future. And that's one of the more recent projects that I've been working on. So the interesting thing for me, and I wanted to give you 3 bits of advice while I was just having a chat here, because I was thinking, what would I want to give to my primary school self as a bit of advice? And at school and today, a lot of my job is about asking questions. So that was the first thing I want to say to you: question everything. If you question things in life, it's that curiosity that leads to discovery. And that's the same thing that I do in my engineering day job, as I had to do at school when I was learning all the topics that I was interested about. So that's what I do for my day job in engineering. But there's a little bit more. There's a bit of an interesting overlap between baking and engineering. So you've got to plan, it's got to be precise. And obviously I enjoy it too. But when I started baking, I wasn't very good. And I don't know if you've started a hobby and the first time you try it, it's very easy to be a little bit rubbish and it's very easy to give up on it as well. But actually, after I started and after I practiced and learnt from those failures, I was able to improve quite a bit. And this was kind of over the period of a few months when I really wanted to get better at baking. And I started to think, oh, I'm actually getting a little bit good. So I decided to embrace the failure. And that was a fantastic opportunity for me to learn. And you can do the same thing. You will never pick up something and be immediately good at it. And if you do, you're very lucky. But most of the time, you have to work hard to get good at things. And it's the learning from those failures that's the really important thing and moving on. For every one success that somebody has, there's probably 9 failures that they might not talk about, but sometimes all we see is the things going well. So I went on a show called The Great British Bake Off, which some of you might have watched at home back in 2016. And I was lucky enough to get through to the final. And I brought a lot of engineering into the tent. I made some geared pies that interlocked together and spun. I made some mousse cakes that span around. I made a bridge out of gingerbread inspired by my time at Cambridge. And all of that got me thinking that I wanted to take this a little bit further. So in 2016, I was lucky enough to be invited to make a cake for royalty for Prince William. Now first in line to the throne, which is exciting. And I got asked to make an engineering cake and I thought it's got to be really special. So I made a rotating jet engine cake that moved. And when I was building it, I've shown you some of the kind of behind the scenes shots of how I built the skeleton on the inside and how I actually made the gingerbread fan blades that spun. I realized I was using a lot of my engineering brain in the baking, which got me thinking that a lot of people think these are totally separate, baking and engineering, but actually there's this fun overlap in the middle, which is what I call baconeering. And I'm trying to get it into the dictionary. It won't be in the dictionary in your classroom just yet, but I'm hoping one day we'll get it in there if I keep talking about it enough. So what is baconeering? Well, baconeering to me is not just making a cake and carving it into the shape of something like a car or a boat or whatever. It's about using and explaining engineering through baking. And that's just an illustration of not limiting yourself. So what I do at the moment is I do 4 days a week where I work as an aerospace engineer on those future aircraft. And then I have 1 day in the week where I get to work on baking and kind of making things that to entertain and inspire people. And that's what I do on the other day. So I've had an opportunity to baconeer a load of things. I worked with Warner Brothers on the Fantastic Beasts film launch to make little versions of the baked things in their film. So you might have heard of nifflers, these little creatures that I recreated from bread. I've made a fully edible wind turbine cake where I used candy canes to make all the little axles. I made biscuit bearings. And I always wanted to take this to a bigger scale because I thought we can engineer food in a really incredible way. So last year, I was lucky enough to be a judge and got to produce a series called Baking Impossible. Now, hopefully some of you have had a chance to see this already, but if you don't, I think you'd really, really enjoy it. So Baking Impossible, we put together teams of professional bakers and professional engineers, and I got to give them a load of really hard challenges. So one of the things you can see on the bottom right there is a boat that is entirely made of chocolate. That whole thing is edible. And we asked them to make floating, waterproof, edible boats, which had to sail down a channel. And that was just week 1. And these are some of the incredible things that they made. So they had to look great, but they also had to perform an engineering function because there's loads of really interesting engineering connections in the kitchen. Chocolate is waterproof. You can make gingerbread that is a really good structure. So instead of just a gingerbread house, which is fun, and some of you might have tasted one of those at Christmas time at the end of the year, you can make a gingerbread skyscraper. You can make one that's 6 foot high, and then we shook them on an earthquake shaking table. So there's a real overlap between those two interests. And although you might not be interested in baking, or maybe not even engineering, you might decide engineering's not for you, but there will likely be things in your life which are interests that you feel might be separate. But there's no reason why with a bit of creativity you can't combine your interests to kind of build a kind of fulfilling life for yourself. And for me, that's baking meets engineering to do the baconeering. So by day, I work on the aircraft of the future, and by night, I build these weird things that can float down channels, and then you can eat them afterwards. And I'm really hoping one day to build an edible, full-scale kayak that I can paddle across a lake and then eat it afterwards as my treat. So those are the three things I kind of wanted to leave you with. Keep asking questions. Curiosity is great, and all the way through to adult life and careers, it'll serve you really well. Failing at things is rubbish, but it's actually quite important if you want to get good at something, because it's very rare you're going to be instantly good off the spot. But it doesn't get any less rubbish. It's always a bit rubbish failing, but I always try to remember if there's something to learn. And don't limit yourself as well. If you've got different interests, or if you're still working it out, that's okay. You've got loads of time, but there's no reason why you can't carve out your own path that somebody hasn't quite done before. So thanks very much. I rattled through that, I realised, in about 10 minutes, but I would love to hear questions either about the baking or the engineering or the baconeering. All questions very, very welcome.
But I have one to start with, and that is, what do you love about what you do?
Well, I love the variety, Scott, to be honest. So, and that's true for both the baking and the engineering bit of what I do. So in engineering, I get to work with some amazing people. And, you know, a typical week for me could be starting the week working on what a battery aircraft of the future might look like. And at the end of the week, it might be trying to understand how we pipe future fuel somewhere on the other side of the planet. So I get to be really creative in my job. There's a lot of problem solving. And the same goes for when I get a difficult cake commission. So I just love the variety. No 2 days are the same for me.
So speaking about that, a difficult cake creation, Rebecca asks, what's the strangest thing that you've built out of food?
Strangest thing I've built out of food? That is a great question. It would probably be the wind turbine, actually. I briefly brought it up, but that for me was a challenge beyond the jet engine cake that I showed, because it had some secret skeleton on the inside. But I always wanted to make a completely edible spinning cake of some description. But spinning things are quite difficult to make edible. But I had this kind of genius moment where I thought I can make a bearing out of the biscuits, and I can chop up some candy canes and weld them together almost to make an internal structure. So that was bizarre. That was for an energy company when they were expanding the renewables that they were doing, and they wanted to make a wind turbine cake. And I kind of pushed them and said, I don't just want to make a cake with a picture of a wind turbine on top. I actually want to make something that works, spins, that we can kind of show the construction process and the engineering. So that's probably one of the more odd things.
So we saw in your presentation that you were fascinated with flying when you were young, and that inspired you in this engineering. But Rachel asks, what inspired you to bake?
Great question. Thanks, Rachel. So I always loved eating sweet things, and my both my parents and my gran were really good bakers, and there's still some family favorites we make today. And it's only really when I moved away from home and I realized buying all this stuff some of the time is getting quite expensive. So I thought I might as well just learn myself how to make some of these things. And then actually realized I quite enjoyed the process and the precision, because sometimes with cooking, you can make it up a little bit as you go along. Whereas baking, you have to be pretty precise from the beginning. And that really appealed to me because I could kind of test different things and see what changed. And it was very rewarding once you felt like you were making progress. So yeah, I think I'm just a little bit greedy and I love it. And that's probably why I got into it, is I saw these nice things and I wanted to make them for myself.
So you talked there about sort of testing as you go. Is that really important when you're working at Rolls-Royce as well?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, failing and testing, we often talk about failing early, and some of the really big engineering companies actually have failure parties. So Google's an example of one where they celebrate every time somebody has a massive project failure, because they consider it's better to fail sooner rather than later. So rather than it being something that we don't talk about and that we hide from, we're very open with our failures. And I work in research, so we're doing stuff which is quite futuristic. And a lot of the time, you don't know if it's going to work at the start. You have to experiment a bit. You have to do a bit of maths. You maybe have to make like a model on the computer. And then it turns out it doesn't work. So about 80% of the stuff that we might look at won't go anywhere. And that's just something we have to get used to and get comfortable with. So yeah, failing early and kind of experimenting and testing, huge part of what I do.
I'm going to try and encourage that here. Failing parties make me feel better. So we've got a question in from Roxanne, and Roxanne asks, do you bring your baking into Rolls-Royce for your colleagues, and do they enjoy eating it, or are they too interested in the engineering part of the cake?
Well, I'd say on a normal week, if I'm bringing something into the office, it's not got that much engineering. I don't bring in a rotating cake every week. But when I do bring it in, it was interesting before and after I kind of went on TV. It's always been a great way to kind of get to know people in an office, but the cakes definitely disappeared a bit quicker after I kind of been on Bake Off and people realized that I was actually all right at it. But yeah, I still try to bring it in. If we have a big team meeting, I'll try and bring something large in, or if it's a colleague's birthday. But I try to save the big engineered kind of commissions and everything for kind of big events or engineering things that I'm coming along to.
So we've got another question here from Rowan, and this is again about both engineering and baking, or baconeering. Is there a challenge that you haven't had the opportunity to take yet but would love to do in the future? You mentioned a kayak you could sail across the river and eat, but is there anything else you've been really desperately wanting to try?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the kayaks one, the other one, which we didn't get a chance to do it on the first season of Baking Impossible, is I would love to do something flight related that's edible. Now, the problem is planes are actually pretty clever because they generate a load of lift for their weight, and it's very hard to replicate that with something edible that's strong enough. But I did think if we could make a wind tunnel, there might be a way if I had a wind tunnel, which somebody allowed me into with something biscuity, I could make an aircraft that could generate lift and we could test in a wind tunnel to destruction that was totally edible. But I need to convince someone to let me into their very expensive wind tunnel first. So that is something I would really love to do, though, because obviously aerospace is where my heart is.
Yeah.
But it is, by definition, one of the more difficult things to recreate with baking.
So we have a question in here. This one's actually sent to us, and it's about, you mentioned when you first started baking how you thought you were a bit rubbish at it, but the more and more you tried. When you first started working as an engineer, was it hard, and has it gotten any easier?
Yes, I think starting a new job is always a little bit tricky. I've always felt a little bit out of my depth. Some people call that imposter syndrome, where you feel like everybody else knows what they're doing and you don't. And quite soon you realize that everybody feels a little bit like that at various points throughout life. Nobody has it all worked out. And the most important thing you can do is be open and tell people if you're struggling, and also chat with your friends and your colleagues to try and learn. So when I arrived, it was a huge learning curve because I'd never worked in a big engineering company before. But actually, through asking questions and kind of listening and understanding the answers, I was able to kind of climb up with understanding. And before you know it, a few months in, you become the one that starts answering questions that the newer people in the team have. And that's when you realize, oh, actually, no, I'm being helpful here. I know a little bit more what I'm doing, but I'm not sure if it gets easier because, part of the joy of it being in engineering is you love a challenge, you love to solve problems. And if I kept on getting the same problem year in, year out, you'd get a little bit bored. So I think life is often a bit of a game of trying to get better challenges. You're never not going to have challenges in life, but the game is to try and improve those challenges as you go along so that you're satisfied and fulfilled.
Definitely. We've got a few questions still coming in. Remember, if you do have a question, just click the Q&A button and you can type it in there. But this question is, so you've had Rolls-Royce in engineering, Bake Off, Baking Impossible. What's next? Are you allowed to tell us?
Great question. Well, I've got some exciting kind of engineering cake projects in the works, but I can't talk about those just yet. I would love to do more of a kids series. So we had an idea a while ago, and I'm trying to kind of get it over here in the UK to do some sort of Baking Impossible, but where we had kids and students sending in their ideas for bakes. So, they challenge us to make like a chocolate roller coaster, and we try to make a version of that happen with me and my kind of merry crew. So I would love to do that, because after Baking Impossible, I've been sent some incredible ideas from students, and I thought, oh gosh, I wish I'd thought of that myself. Somebody said, oh, you should make a castle with a moat and fire edible things at it to see if you can smash it. And I thought, gosh, that's a great idea. I'm totally going to steal that. So if we're lucky enough to get a second season, maybe we'll try some of those ideas. But I would love to do more something that kind of was able to kind of inspire kids more into engineering to extend the work that we've done on Baking Impossible.
So on Baking Impossible, you said that you were a judge. What baconeering idea impressed you the most during that?
Really good question. So what I was hoping at the outset was that people would discover things that me and the team hadn't thought of when we were setting the challenges, because I obviously had an idea in my mind what I might do. But there were a few things. So somebody came up with this edible glue, and it was a combination. This was the great thing, though. They discovered it early on, and they kept it secret because they didn't want any of the other teams to get on. And it was a combination of gummy bears, chocolate, and you know those little Werther's sweets, the kind of caramelly sweets. And they kind of melted those together, and it was incredible because it set hard but not rock solid. There was still a little bit of give in it, which was good for the earthquake challenge they were eventually using it for. But it was incredibly strong glue, as in if you stuck two pieces of biscuit together with this glue and tried to pull them together, it was like you'd use super glue. It was incredible, but the whole thing was completely edible. Probably would have, shattered your teeth had you eaten too much of it. But I had never thought to combine those materials before, and it was a bit of a discovery that they then tried a few combinations of to work out which one was best. And that was delightful. I nicked the recipe for that, so now I know what the edible glue is.
And that's proper engineering as well, isn't it?
Exactly. Experimenting to find the best version of something.
So we've got another couple of questions coming in. This one's from Kieran, and Kieran asks, do you have a favourite engineering project you've worked on, and do you have a favourite cake that you've made?
Both great questions, Kieran. Let's start with the cake, because that's the one that pops to mind. So favourite cake that I've worked on would have to be, and it's actually one that wasn't as engineered a cake, but it was my brother's wedding cake last year. So I feel like he trusted me enough to make it, which was a big deal for me, because I still in the back of my mind think sometimes, oh, you're not that good a baker. And when there's so many people there at a wedding, I thought, gosh, that's a lot of pressure, but I was really pleased with the cake. He's really into Lego. So his wife, Claire, had asked me to secretly make a Lego theme. So I made some Lego fondant minifigures to go on top. And instead of flowers coming down the side of the wedding cake, it was chocolate Lego bricks that were kind of tumbling down the side. But he didn't know about any of this. So he was surprised on the day, which was brilliant. And luckily, it all went to plan. And as for the engineering project I'm kind of proudest to have worked on, it was probably the first thing I arrived, because I joined Rolls-Royce in 2013, and I got to work on an engine, which then we were still testing it. It was very early. And then last year I got to fly on the plane, and realizing that I'd done work on the engine that I was then flying on the plane. That was a big moment for me, because we work on quite large aircraft. So it's only if you're traveling far distances. I don't get to travel on those very often. But I was lucky enough to travel on this aircraft, and when I realized I'd worked on that engine and I knew loads of details, that was really, really exciting for me, that I'd worked on something that I could kind of see and touch in the real world.
That would be quite cool, actually. You're flying through the sky and you think, I helped make this fly.
And I was listening, when we took off, I thought, gosh, it's nice and silent, isn't it? Nothing rattling around there. That's brilliant. We've done a good job.
So we've got another question then coming in from Rowan, and Rowan asks, who's your favourite engineer throughout history and why? And do you have one for baking?
Oh gosh, that's a great question about favourite engineer. There's so many reasons to get inspiration from people. It's really hard to choose one, but it would probably be, it's got to be something flight related. So it's probably going to be the Wright brothers, if I'm honest, because they were kind of where it all kicked off in terms of the first powered flight in Kitty Hawk in the US. So it's probably got to be those two. But there's so many reasons to get inspiration, and I get to work with a load of amazing people now. And in terms of bakers, again, there's a load of great ones. I guess the one that I kind of grew up watching on the TV was kind of Mary Berry. In a way, she was always on the TV, so that's why it was also very nice to kind of get a chance to meet her, and she's just as nice in real life.
So we've got another question here, and this one's again a bit about engineering. So you've worked on so many different exciting projects. What is it about engineering that keeps you excited?
These are really good questions. I think just the discovery, the curiosity. You know, we will never have all the answers. I think that's kind of it. You could say the same for becoming kind of a scientist as well. Is it's the art of discovery and invention that keeps it exciting. It's not as if one day we'll say we've done all the engineering. All the engineering is complete. We've reached 100%. There's no more engineering to be done. There's always more to discover. There's always a new problem. And that's what keeps me interested is, you know, we're constantly being challenged. So for aircraft, it's really, really difficult because these new fuels are going to be very expensive. So how do we make the aircraft more efficient and lighter? How are we going to persuade people to start flying on these? So it's a really challenging problem, which has loads of different areas that it impacts. So it's going to take a load of really determined engineers over a long period to make it happen, and that's what keeps me motivated, kind of working for a better world.
Oh, I like that. That was a good soundbite. That working for a better world. We've got another question in here for Rebecca. We've got time for a couple more questions. So if you're sitting on one, make sure you use the Q&A button to put them in. But Rebecca asks, do you think baconering will ever make it into shops? Will we be able to buy spinning cakes from Tesco in the future?
Oh, I certainly hope so. I'm really hoping to do a book or something about how you can recreate some of this stuff at home. So, you know, I'm not expecting people to make 5-foot chocolate catamarans to float down the bathtub at home, but I'm thinking more, you know, something that you can do as kind of a project over the weekend that you can eat everything afterwards, but you get to do a little bit of an experiment with. I'd love to recreate that. As for seeing in the shops, I don't know. I hadn't even thought of that. It's a good idea. Maybe I'll take that one away.
Brilliant. And we've got one more question in here, and this question's from Rachel. And Rachel's asking about how much does the environment that you're in affect what you do? So whether that's in a really, really busy office or if it's in the tent at Bake Off, how much does everything happening around you affect what you're trying to do?
Another really good one. So Bake Off was very chaotic. There was a load of cameras running around. There was loads of stress. So I had to kind of have a word with myself at various points to try and stay calm, because as soon as you panic, it's kind of game over. So a lot of life is trying to kind of keep calm. Bake Off was definitely the most challenging version of that because I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. There was always people watching. Engineering, I think we've got really good in the last few years, you know, especially since the pandemic now. You can kind of choose where works best for you. So it used to be we all had to go into an office and work together. Whereas now, depending on, you know, your lifestyle, your situation at home, where you work better, if you need some kind of quiet time to really concentrate or something, or if you want to be collaborating and chatting with people in your workplace, you can do a bit of both. So I think it's almost become more open. So I can do usually quite a few days of work in the office in the week, but then I can kind of be at home on a day like today. And then it means if I really need to focus and concentrate on something, I've not got those distractions. So I think it's about trying to find the best environment for what you need to do. If you need to do something really creative, often I find other people, it's really good to share your ideas with other people. And then often they'll add things to it, or you can come up with a better version of it.
Brilliant. Well, we've got time for just one last question. This question comes from Roxanne. And Roxanne asks, using your problem-solving engineering skills, what's been the hardest thing to overcome when baking, which is something you might have had to attempt over and over, but you finally got there, you finally cracked it?
Oh, gosh, probably it's not a single cake, actually. It was a type of pastry. It's phyllo pastry, which I don't know if anybody's ever made it. It's this incredible kind of Greek pastry. It's wafer thin. You can read a newspaper through it. It's so thin, and you have to stretch it. When it's made in Greece, it's kind of stretched over these huge tables, which I obviously didn't have at home. And honestly, trying to learn that, the idea is that you make these teeny, thinner than paper layers that you stretch out by hand, and they dry out and snap really quickly. And then you end up layering them up with butter in between them, so it makes this really kind of crunchy, crumbly wafer texture. It was a total nightmare, and I had to do it on Bake Off. And I only just about cracked it kind of the day before we had to go into the tent. But it was a week of horror, and it scarred me so much. I've never gone back to phyllo since, and I would now just buy shop bought because it's just not worth the hassle.
I was just thinking it's so tasty as well, but
So,
it sounds like it might be a
so
tough one.
some of the engineering stuff and the problem solving pales in comparison to that, because that felt like I just couldn't get something that was meant to be a basic building block right. There was no shortcut around it. I tried the different methods. I was really just up against it. And that's when I realized, you can engineer your way around some things, and sometimes you just need to work on the skill.
Brilliant. Well, I want to say thank you very much. Thank you to everyone out there for joining us, but special thanks to Andrew for inspiring all the engineers in the making who are watching. Now, it's your turn to come up with your own engineering ideas. Now, remember and send them to us once you've finished so we can get your certificates sent out. But we hope to see you at our public exhibitions in May. So thank you to everyone. And remember, if you were an engineer, what would you do?